Hey y'all, welcome back to another election analysis. Today we will be looking at the Indiana gubernatorial election. So let's get started. These are my takeaways. So first off, Governor Holcomb won very big, beating Democrat Woody Myers by 24% in an election dominated by the coronavirus. Democrat Woody Myers kept saying that Governor Holcomb wasn't doing enough to combat the virus, while Libertarian Donald Rainwater questioned the governor's ability to impose COVID restrictions. This was the Democrats' worst loss in a gubernatorial election in Indiana since 1828. Exit polls indicated that Governor Holcomb won 30% of Biden voters. Biden won 9% more votes than Woody Myers did in the gubernatorial election. Biden won 5 counties and Myers won 3. This is Biden's map on the left, Myers' map on the right. This Indy Politics poll showed that nearly 2/3 of Indianans approved of Holcomb's handling early on in the pandemic. A little bit later on in the pandemic, it was 62%. And then by October, Holcomb's approval was 79% overall, 83% looking at COVID specific. And people were voting with COVID-19 on their minds. A coalition of both Democrats and Republicans opposed his or approved of his handling. Almost all the people who didn't approve were part of that Libertarian wing who thought that he was overstepping his boundaries as a governor. Democrat Woody Myers' campaign had a late start, name recognition issues, and campaign finance issues too. One Indy Star article read, Woody Myers' campaign has no cash and no momentum. He raised less money than the Democratic nominee for Attorney General, and most of the national money went into the Democrats' efforts in Indiana's 5th congressional district. Also, Governor Holcomb is way more moderate than President Trump, so he built a winning coalition that included many Democratic voters. Libertarian Donald Rainwater was a strong, charismatic candidate who took advantage of some Hoosiers' anger over mask mandates, shutdowns, and COVID restrictions. While many Libertarians target centrist and moderate voters, Rainwater targeted the right wing of the Republican Party, and it worked. At one point in the campaign, Rainwater polled at 24%. He ended up winning just 11% of the vote, which is still historic for a Libertarian. This cartoon illustrates the 3 candidates' positions on COVID-19. This was a Goldilocks election. Were Holcomb's efforts too little, just right, or too much? And this is a picture that really sums up the election. This is a political cartoon by Gary Varvel. You can visit his website here. Give big credit to him for illustrating the election so well. These were the final results. This election was dominated by COVID. It was a referendum on Holcomb's leadership during the pandemic, and he won big. But you may be thinking, why are Democrats doing so badly in Indiana? As you can see here, Obama flipped the state in 2008. Now, as you can see, this was a fluke. 49.9% was way higher than all the other presidential election results around it. Republicans have a strong history of performing very, very well in the Hoosier state, almost always winning above 55% of the vote. In particular, Obama ran at the margins of the 2 big Democratic strongholds, East Chicagoland and Indianapolis. And he did so well in East Chicagoland because of the fact that it shares the same media market as the city of Chicago. And he also did well in many of the competitive counties in the mid-sized cities and rural areas of Indiana, in central and southern parts of the state as well. Just 12 years later, this is the Trump Biden map. So I just want to flip between these two for a little bit. Look at this. As you can see, almost the entire state of Indiana is redder except for a few counties just outside of Indianapolis. So look at how Indiana has changed from 2008 to 2020. Republicans have just dominated since 2010. In 2012, Joe Donnelly, a Democrat, did pull off an upset, winning his Senate race when Republican opponent said that rape was an act of God, but he did lose by over 5 points in 2018. Rural Indiana is now a Republican stronghold, and Democrats struggle in mid-sized cities like Fort Wayne, Evansville, and Terre Haute. And here is a map of Indiana. As you can see, Democrats are very reliant on the northwestern corner of the state and then Indianapolis, but they really struggle everywhere else. Look at this. You have Evansville, you got the Louisville suburbs, you got Fort Wayne. Indiana Democrats need to do way better. South Bend and Elkhart and Goshen. You got all these areas, you got all these little red dots in the middle of every county, these small towns where Democrats are struggling. So they really need to do better all across the state. if they want to be competitive in Indiana again. And here's just another illustration of their struggles. Democrats do very well in Marion and Lake counties. Marion County, that's Indianapolis. Lake County, that's Hammond and Gary. Monroe County, that is the college town of Bloomington. St. Joseph County is where you find South Bend. But look at these other big counties. Allen County, that's where you find Fort Wayne. Hamilton County, that is where you find the city of Carmel, just outside of Indianapolis, those suburbs. And Biden has improved there, but Democrats are really having trouble in a lot of these big suburban counties and mid-sized cities. And then look at rural Indiana, overwhelmingly Republican. Look at these, some Davies and Franklin County voted Republican by overwhelming margins in 2016. And in my analysis of these election results, I will break Indiana down into several regions. Indianapolis, the other metro areas, which are these gray zones, and then rural Indiana, which is everything in white. One theme that you'll notice is that Democrats are struggling in many of Indiana's rural metropolitan areas outside Indianapolis and Chicagoland. Even in Indianapolis suburbs, Democrats still have a lot of trouble winning votes outside of this little ring right here. You see this highway, I-465? Democrats really struggle outside of here. So what I did was I broke these results down by region. I took spreadsheets and made everything look nice. I took some turnout data, and now let's take a look at the charts and graphs that I made. So here are the charts for my regional analysis. As you can see, the Indianapolis metro makes up about 30% of the state. Rural Indiana makes up about 30% of the state. The other metro areas make up 40% of Indiana, and Gary makes up 10%. Fort Wayne is 8%. As you can see, this is how the race kind of broke down. Indianapolis, because of those suburban counties outside I-495 or 465, look at how well the Republicans did, winning a lot of votes there. Republicans did very well in rural Indiana. So Democrats were strongest in Bloomington, but weakest in Kokomo. Republicans were strongest in Evansville, Henderson, and weakest in Bloomington. And the Libertarians were strongest in Kokomo at 16.5%, but they were weakest in Evansville, Henderson at 4.5%. Evansville, Henderson is this one right here, due to the strength of the Republican Party. Democrats did very well in Marion County, but struggle in the suburban counties that surround it. Regarding other metro areas, Democrats performed pretty well in Bloomington, the Chicago suburbs, and South Bend, but they have trouble in other mid-sized cities. Democrats only won 23% of the vote in rural Indiana. They need some soul searching. Democrats used to be very competitive in rural Indiana back in the day. As you can see, Libertarians, this purple color right here, signifies that the Libertarians gain ground in almost every single region. Or they did gain ground in every single region. Republicans gain ground everywhere too, but just slightly. Democrats are down everywhere because their candidate was unable to compete when it came to handling of COVID-19. And even though Indianapolis didn't turn out very well, the Republican suburban counties outside of Indianapolis did. But as you can see, if I were to pull up Indianapolis, that's Marion County, turnout was just 59%, one of the worst in the entire state. So if Democrats can't even turn out their base very well, they're going to struggle in a statewide election. And finally, let's look at some of my basic charts. As you can see, Myers really struggled to raise money. The four biggest counties in Indiana by far are Allen, Hamilton, Lake, and Marion. So Allen, this is Fort Wayne. Hamilton, this is where you find Carmel. Lake is where you find Gary and Hammond. And then Marion is where you find Indianapolis. The only blue counties were Lake, Marion, and Monroe. And look at all these Republican counties out here. This is a county by county analysis. Only tiny little, cute little group of blue counties here. And look at all those Republican counties. It's really hard to win when you're only winning a few blue counties, especially when you're not winning them by very much. As you can see, Libertarians are up everywhere. There were a few counties where Republicans were down, but they were up generally. Democrats were losing ground everywhere. As you can see, a few Democratic counties had pretty little turnout. Almost all the counties turned out between 66 and 68, though, or at least in the range of 66 to 73, or 64 to 73. Looking at the Democratic Party of Indiana, uh, this is a pie chart that illustrates the makeup of the Democratic Party base. As you can see, they're very dependent on Marion County. So when Marion County has turnout at 59%, as I showed you earlier, that's a problem. They're also very dependent on Lake County in comparison to the other parties. So for Democrats, this pie chart tells you they're very dependent on Marion and Lake. Look at all the counties where the Democrats were below 20%. That's just unacceptable for a major party. The most common value was between 15 and 20% in many of these rural Indiana counties. Democrats have a lot of work they need to do. And they lost ground in every single county. They lost an average of 17% of the vote share from 2016. There was one county where they lost 37%. While 20%, 21% of the Democrats' base is in Marion County, only 9% of the Republican base lives there. And Republicans are a lot more dependent on Allen County, where you find Fort Wayne. That's typically a stronghold for them. Governor Holcomb only had two bad counties here, Marion and Monroe. Holcomb averaged 63% of the vote per county. He gained ground in almost every single county. And finally, looking at the Libertarians, looks very similar to the Republican Party, where they're not as dependent on Marion and Lake as the Democrats are, and they're a little bit more dependent on Allen County. Look at these percentages. This is the Libertarian Party, and look at all the times that they were above 20%. So I gotta say, this is a very impressive performance by a Libertarian. A historic day for the Indiana Libertarian Party. They exceeded 20% of the vote in 14 counties. So this is definitely a historic night for them. A lot of Indianans were just ticked off by Governor Holcomb's mask mandates and restrictions during COVID-19. So they came out to the polls and voted Libertarian. There were about 3 dozen counties where the Libertarians had more votes than the Democrats, according to the Indy Star. As you can see, they gained a lot of ground in every county, and they averaged almost all of their counties were between 7 and 17%. And that's about it. Thank you so much for tuning in to my analysis. Videos coming up soon will be analyzing elections in Missouri, Montana, and Newfoundland and Labrador. So stay tuned.